They told me to stay in the car, Grandma. Those 5 words cut deeper than any knife. I had driven them for hours, dressed in my best, just to be left sitting in silence while my own blood walked into a celebration I wasn't welcome at. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I put the car in gear, turned the wheel, and drove myself home. When I reached my gate, I stepped out, closed it slowly, and locked it with my own hands. That sound of iron clicking shut was the beginning of my revenge. Because family is supposed to protect you, not humiliate you. Blood should shelter you, not leave you outside like a stranger. But they had no idea what I planned next. No clue that the woman they had dismissed, the grandmother they thought was too old, too soft, was already setting the stage for a reckoning that would shake every corner of their world. Tell me, if your own children and grandchildren treated you this way, would you forgive them? Or would you close the gate behind you and make them pay for every ounce of disrespect? I was born in Oregon, and I never left. The land has a way of holding you. The scent of pine in the mornings, the weight of the fog rolling down the hills, the way the soil feels damp and alive when you press your hand into it. That land became my anchor, my battlefield, and my prison, all at once. From the time I was a girl, I knew sacrifice would be my second skin. I married young, too young, to a man who carried more dreams than discipline. While he chased opportunity, I held the family together. I worked nights at the cannery, mornings at the diner, and afternoons sewing for neighbors who needed hems fixed or dresses altered. My hands never stopped moving, my back never stopped aching, but my children never went hungry. I remember boiling potatoes 3 nights in a row because that was all I had left in the pantry. I sliced them thin, fried them in oil I had already used twice, and told my kids it was a special treat. They smiled, and I smiled back, even though inside my chest burned with shame. Sacrifice is a quiet language. It doesn't announce itself. It whispers in the dark when you give your children your coat and walk home shivering. It lives in the silence when you pay their tuition instead of fixing your leaking roof. There were winters when my feet froze inside worn boots, but I made sure my son had a basketball uniform that looked new, even if I had to buy it from the thrift store and patch it until it did. There were summers when my daughter begged for piano lessons. I scrubbed hotel bathrooms on weekends so she could sit at a polished bench and press keys that sang under her fingers. I carried their futures on my shoulders, and I never complained. My husband? He drifted further away with each year. One night he left with a duffel bag and a half-hearted promise to send money. That money never came. Divorce papers came instead. I signed them with a steady hand and a heart that refused to break. Because I still had the children, my reason, my duty. Oregon became my fortress. I paid off the house $1 at a time. When the bank threatened foreclosure, I sold my wedding ring. When the water heater burst, I took double shifts. Every inch of that land, every nail in those wooden walls was purchased with pieces of my body and soul. My children grew tall while I grew bent. They ate full plates while I drank thin coffee. I told myself, it's worth it. They will see someday. They will know what I gave. But here is the truth no one says aloud. Children don't always see. They take because taking is easier than noticing. They promise to repay, but life distracts them. Still, I clung to hope. I remember my daughter, at 12, holding my hand one night after dinner. She whispered, "Mama, when I grow up, I'll buy you a house with golden windows. You won't have to work anymore." That promise kept me warm for years. I remember my son, 17, clutching his graduation certificate. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "I couldn't have done this without you." For one moment, the pain of every sacrifice felt worth it. But moments fade. Promises fade. What doesn't fade are the scars of sacrifice. My knees still ache from years of standing at a fryer. My back still stiffens from scrubbing floors. My hands are calloused from sewing by dim light. The years stretched, and the sacrifices grew larger. College tuitions drained me dry. Medical bills after my son's accident left me sleepless for months, counting dollars on the kitchen table like a gambler who always loses. Weddings came, and I wrote checks so they could have the day they dreamed of, even if it meant I ate soup for weeks. Every milestone of their lives was written in my handwriting, on checks, on forms, on permission slips. They moved forward, shining. I stayed behind, holding the bill. And yet, I never asked for repayment. All I wanted was respect, a chair at their table, a phone call on my birthday, a place in their hearts. Sometimes I would sit at my gate in the evenings, watching the road. I'd imagine my children arriving unannounced, just to see me. I'd imagine grandchildren running up the path, laughing, their arms open wide. I imagined it so vividly that the silence that followed cut me to the bone. Seasons changed. Years rolled on. I grew older. My hair silvered, my body slowed, but my love for them never dimmed. I still cooked their favorite meals when they visited. I still pressed a few dollars into their hands when they left, even if it was the last of my cash. Because that's what mothers do. We give, even when we have nothing left to give. But beneath all that sacrifice, something else was growing. A seed of bitterness, watered by silence, fertilized by ingratitude. Each unanswered call, each forgotten holiday, each moment I was treated as an afterthought, it all piled up like stones on my chest. I began to wonder, had my sacrifices become invisible? Had I become invisible? The night it hit me hardest, I was sitting alone at the kitchen table. A pot of stew simmered on the stove, filling the air with the scent of onions and bay leaves, their favorite. I had set 4 bowls, expecting them. I even lit a candle. But the clock ticked past 7, past 8, past 9. My phone stayed silent. I blew out the candle. The smoke curled into the dark like a ghost. And in that silence, I felt the truth press down on me. All those years, all those sacrifices. Maybe they had never been enough to earn me love. That thought nearly broke me. Nearly. Because right then, in that lonely kitchen, I made a vow. If they could not see my worth, I would show them. If they could not value my sacrifices, I would make them feel the weight of everyone. I would no longer be their silent provider, their invisible servant. I would become something else. The gate outside creaked in the wind, and I looked at it with new eyes. That gate wasn't just wood and metal. It was a line between what I had given and what I was about to take back. And they had no idea, the reckoning that was coming for them. They say betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from those you feed, clothe, and love. I learned that truth on an ordinary Saturday in Oregon, the day my own blood cut me deeper than any stranger ever could. It began slowly, like cracks forming in a dam, small, almost invisible, but growing stronger every day. My children, once so close, began to treat me like furniture, present but unnoticed. Birthdays came and went with silence. Holidays turned into polite invitations, sent at the last minute, with a seat saved for me at the edge of the table, near the drafty window. I told myself it was nothing, that families grow busy, that children have their own lives. But deep down, I felt the shift. The phone calls shortened. The visits thinned. When they did come, they spoke in whispers I wasn't meant to hear. Words like property and inheritance floated through the air, heavier than smoke. I pretended not to notice, but inside, my stomach twisted. One evening, my grandson, barely 16, looked around my house and said, "This place is so old. Dad says it'll be ours someday. We'll probably tear it down and build something modern." I froze. The blood in my veins turned to ice. "He didn't say yours someday, Grandma. He said ours." That was the first knife. The second came a week later, when I overheard my own daughter arguing with her husband in the driveway. Her voice sharp, his calm. "She can't live forever. When the time comes, the land should be divided fairly. That's what we've earned." Earned. As if my sacrifices, my endless nights, were nothing but down payments for their greed. I stayed silent. I swallowed the bitterness like medicine, though it burned on the way down. But the third knife, the one that tore me open, came at the wedding. It was a family wedding, the kind that draws every relative from miles away. I dressed carefully that morning, wearing a blouse I had ironed twice, my mother's brooch pinned at the collar. My hands shook with pride as I drove my children and grandchildren to the venue. The car was full of chatter, laughter, the kind of warmth I had craved for years. For a moment, I thought maybe this was my chance to belong again. When we pulled into the parking lot, I turned off the engine and reached for my purse. That's when it happened. My grandson leaned forward, his voice casual but sharp as glass. "Stay in the car, Grandma. We'll be back for you later." The words hit me like a slap. Stay in the car. As if I were a child. As if I were an embarrassment to be hidden away. I stared at them, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was a joke. But no one did. My daughter adjusted her shawl, avoiding my eyes. My son cleared his throat and opened the door. Not one of them defended me. I whispered, "Why?" No one answered. They filed out, heels clicking on pavement, laughter spilling into the air. The sound of the car door slamming shut was louder than thunder in my ears. I sat there, frozen. My heart pounded against my ribs, not with age, but with rage. The windows fogged with my breath, the steering wheel cold beneath my trembling hands. Minutes passed, then an hour. The sky dimmed, and the parking lot filled with cars that carried families who welcomed each other with open arms. Inside the venue, music began to play, muffled by walls I wasn't allowed past. That was the moment I realized I was no longer family to them. I was a burden, a shadow, a reminder of sacrifice they didn't want to acknowledge. Finally, I turned the key, started the car, and drove. The road home was silent except for the hum of the engine and the steady beat of my heart, each thump echoing with betrayal. When I reached my gate, I stepped out, my shoes crunching against the gravel. I closed the gate slowly, my hand steady now, and locked it with a final click. That sound wasn't just a lock, it was a vow. Because blood should protect you, not humiliate you. Family should shield you, not hide you away like shame. I stood there, under the wide Oregon sky, and whispered to the wind, "They will regret this, every one of them." But the betrayal didn't end with the wedding. Days later, I learned the full truth. My neighbor, an old friend, came to visit. She leaned across my table, her eyes soft, but her words sharp. "They were talking about you, you know, about your land, your house. They said you're just holding space until they can take it. They're planning already." Her words confirmed what my heart already feared. I wasn't a mother to them anymore. I was a title deed. I wasn't a grandmother. I was acreage. That night, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the walls I had built with my own hands. The scent of cedar drifted in through the open window. Every corner of that house held a memory. My son taking his first steps on the porch. My daughter singing in the kitchen while I cooked. My late husband hammering nails into the roof before he left us. And now, those same walls were nothing but profit in their eyes. I wept, but only for a while. because after the tears came something else. A cold, steady fire. I wiped my face, stood up, and looked at the mirror above the sink. My reflection stared back, wrinkled, tired, but unbroken. You gave them everything, I whispered to myself. And now they will learn what happens when you take advantage of a woman who has nothing left to lose. The betrayal was complete, and so was my resolve. What I did next, they never saw coming. The night after the wedding, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house creak, as if it, too, knew the weight of what had happened. The words "stay in the car," Grandma replayed over and over in my mind. Each echo hardened me. Each repetition turned hurt into clarity. By dawn, the grief had burned away, leaving something sharper. I realized something vital. If they could betray me so easily, then they must have already decided I was powerless. That was their mistake. I rose, tied my robe tight around my waist, and went to the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of last night's coffee. My hands trembled as I poured a new cup, but it wasn't from age. It was from determination. I whispered to myself, "You will not be their victim. You will be their lesson." That morning, I began to watch them more closely. At first, I kept my distance. Families reveal their true selves when they believe no one is paying attention. I noticed how my daughter visited only when bills piled up. She would arrive with a smile too wide, asking questions about my health, but her eyes always wandered toward the cabinet where I kept my files. My son, on the other hand, wasn't subtle. One afternoon, I caught him standing by the shed, phone pressed to his ear, whispering about liquidating assets and timing. When he noticed me, he forced a laugh and said he was talking about a friend's business. But I had heard enough. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was financial. They wanted my land, my house, my life's work. That realization changed everything. The first step in any battle is knowledge. So, I started to gather it. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I opened old boxes filled with documents, deeds, insurance papers, bank records. Each page reminded me of how hard I had fought to keep this house standing. I spread them across the kitchen table like a general studying maps before war. As I read, I circled dates, underlined clauses, and made notes in the margins. I may not have gone to law school, but I had lived long enough to understand one thing: paper holds power. One night, while flipping through an old folder, I found a letter from my husband's lawyer, dated decades ago. It confirmed the property was in my name alone. My children had no legal claim until I chose to give it. Relief flooded through me like rain on dry soil. They thought they had already inherited, but in reality, they had nothing. Still, I knew whispers could turn into actions. I needed protection. The next morning I drove into town. The streets of Oregon were quiet, the smell of rain lingering in the air. I parked outside a small brick office with a brass plaque that read, "Anderson and Reed, Attorneys at Law." Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of leather. I sat across from a man in his 50s with kind eyes and sharp questions. He listened as I explained everything: my sacrifices, their betrayal, my fears. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said, "Mrs. Harlan, you have more power than you realize. We can secure your property, restructure your will, and ensure no one touches what is yours without your permission." His words were a balm, but more than that, they were ammunition. Together, we drafted new papers, stronger ones, documents that shifted everything. My will was rewritten, but not in the way they expected. Ownership was protected, trusts were established, contingencies were locked in place, and I made sure none of them would see it coming. When I signed my name at the bottom, the pen didn't just glide across paper, it carved justice into stone. Back at home, I began to test them. When my daughter came over asking about bills, I mentioned casually that I had been updating some paperwork. Her eyes flickered, curiosity flashing like lightning. She asked too quickly, "What kind of paperwork?" I smiled softly and said nothing. The silence was louder than words. When my son dropped by, I left a folder deliberately on the table, filled with meaningless receipts. He glanced at it, pretending disinterest, but his hand twitched as if itching to open it. I saw the hunger in his eyes. They were circling like vultures, and I had just spread out bait. Each reaction confirmed what I already knew. Their love had turned into calculation. But planning revenge is not just about defense, it is about timing. I began to prepare my home like a stage. The gate, once creaking and worn, I oiled until it closed with a sharp, clean sound. The locks I replaced. The fences I reinforced. Every barrier became a symbol. You will not cross me again. Inside, I sorted through old belongings. I burned letters that no longer held love. The smoke curled through the chimney, carrying away decades of lies. Each flame was a ritual, purging weakness, making space for strength. I fixed the broken clock on the mantel. Its steady ticking reminded me, time was mine to control now, not theirs. Yet, I did not reveal my hand too soon. When they called, I answered with warmth. When they visited, I fed them with the same meals they grew up loving. Outwardly, nothing had changed. But inside, I was sharpening my blade. I practiced calmness. Revenge is not fueled by rage. It is fueled by patience. I spoke little, observed much, and recorded everything. Each lie they told, each slip of the tongue, I stored away like arrows in a quiver. One evening, while setting tea on the porch, I overheard my son whisper to my daughter, "She's slipping. It's only a matter of time before she can't manage the place. When that happens, we'll take over. We'll split it. Sell if we have to. But it'll be ours." My daughter hesitated. "What if she changes the papers?" He laughed, low and bitter. "She's too old for that. She doesn't even know where half the files are. Trust me, she won't outsmart us." I didn't flinch. I didn't interrupt. I let them finish their tea, smiling as if I hadn't heard. But inside, I carved their words into memory. Too old, too weak, too blind. They had no idea I was already 5 steps ahead. The investigation stretched for weeks. Each discovery added weight to my decision. I found out my daughter had already spoken to a realtor, inquiring about land values. My son had consulted with a contractor about demolishing the house. Their betrayal wasn't just idle talk, it was a blueprint. And I was building one too. With the lawyer's help, I created a trust. Not for them, but for causes I chose. A scholarship fund in my husband's name. A donation to the church that had once helped me when I had nothing. Even a fund for local families struggling with bills, so no mother would have to choose between food and dignity the way I once did. Every dollar, every acre was spoken for. Every path led away from their greedy hands. One night, as I sealed the last envelope, I held it against my chest. My heart beat steady, not fast. This wasn't anger anymore. This was justice. I whispered aloud, "You thought you could erase me, but I will erase your entitlement instead." The house was silent, but it felt like the walls agreed. Still, I kept one secret closer than all the others. I planned not just to protect what was mine, but to expose them, to let the world see the truth, because humiliation is a sharper blade than silence. So, I began laying the groundwork. I scheduled a family dinner, marking it on the calendar with a red circle. They thought it was an ordinary meal, but I knew it would become the stage for their undoing. As the date drew closer, I prepared not food, but evidence. I organized every document, every betrayal, every plan they had whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. I stacked the papers neatly in a folder. I placed it in a drawer near the dining table, where it would be within reach when the moment came. And each night, I rehearsed the silence I would hold until that moment. Silence is power. And I was ready to wield it. The investigation was complete. The planning was done. I had discovered the depth of their greed. I had built the fortress of my revenge. Now all that remained was execution, and they had no idea. Revenge doesn't start with shouting. It starts with silence, with patience, with small moves no one notices, until it's too late. The day after I finished my planning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents I had signed with the lawyer. The papers felt heavy, like weapons. My name was etched across every page, stronger than any blade or bullet. I thought of the words I had overheard from my son. She's too old to outsmart us. I smiled then, a cold, steady smile. Let them believe that. The sharpest revenge is to be underestimated. My first move was to change the locks. It was a crisp Oregon morning, the air filled with the scent of wet cedar. I hired a locksmith and watched as he replaced every keyhole, every latch. By the time he left, I held a small ring of new keys. The old ones, copies my children might still have, were useless now. I closed the gate, slid the bolt, and whispered to myself, "This house is mine again, not theirs." The second move was financial. I withdrew small amounts of cash, bit by bit, transferring it quietly into a new account under the trust. Not large enough to raise suspicion, but enough to drain the well they were counting on. When my daughter asked me if I needed help managing my confusing accounts, I smiled sweetly and said, "Thank you, dear, but I've got it handled." She didn't know the truth. I was building a wall they could never climb. The third move was symbolic. I walked out to the old shed where boxes of memories gathered dust. Inside, I found photographs, letters, and trinkets from decades ago. Some carried love, others carried pain. I made 2 piles, one for what mattered, pictures of my children when they were still innocent, drawings from their childhood, my husband's old pocket watch. The other pile held the weight of betrayal, letters where they spoke of money, receipts where I paid their debts, reminders of sacrifices never acknowledged. That second pile I burned. The flames rose high, crackling in the cool evening air. Smoke curled upward, carrying away the last remnants of weakness. My eyes watered from the heat, but I did not look away. I whispered, "You will not chain me to your greed anymore." Then came the dinner. I had invited them weeks before, circling the date on my calendar in red. They thought it was an ordinary family meal, a chance for me to play the dutiful mother and grandmother again. I prepared the table carefully. Plates gleamed, silverware polished. A roast filled the air with warmth. The house looked welcoming. But beneath the table, in the drawer near my chair, lay the folder of documents, the will, the trust, the evidence of their betrayal. They arrived, dressed well, carrying bottles of wine and practiced smiles. My daughter kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp and sweet. My son clapped me on the back, his laugh too loud. We ate, we talked, we pretended. But beneath their words, I heard the calculation. Each compliment felt like bait. Each smile felt like a mask. Finally, as dessert plates were cleared, my son leaned forward. His voice softened, but his eyes glinted. "Mom, we've been thinking, maybe it's time you let us help with the property. It's a lot for you to handle. We could take care of things. Make sure everything runs smoothly." My daughter nodded quickly. "Yes, it would take the stress off you. You deserve rest." Rest. That word. It meant erasure. I looked at them, calm and steady. Then, without a word, I opened the drawer, pulled out the folder, and placed it on the table. The room stilled. I slid the papers toward them. My voice was low, but sharp as glass. "You don't own this land. You don't own this house, and you never will." Their faces drained of color. My son grabbed the papers, flipping through them, his breath quickening. My daughter's hand trembled as she read the trust. This isn't fair," she stammered. I leaned back, the weight of decades lifting from my chest. "What's not fair is a mother who gave you everything, only to be treated as a burden. What's not fair is being told to stay in the car while you celebrate without me. You wanted my life's work? Consider it gone." The silence after was thick. My grandchildren fidgeted, confused, sensing the storm but not its cause. My son slammed the papers down. "You can't do this." I met his anger with calm. "I already have." The days after the dinner were filled with fury, calls, texts, visits. They demanded explanations, shouted at my gate, begged for reconsideration. But the locks held. The gate stayed closed. I didn't answer. The silence said everything. Yet revenge is not complete until it is public. So, I took one final step. I met with the lawyer again and arranged a community announcement. Not a grand event, just a quiet disclosure at church where neighbors and friends gathered. Standing at the front, I read my statement. My voice was steady, carrying through the wooden rafters. This land, this home, will not pass to those who disrespected it. It will go to causes that honor sacrifice and dignity, to children who need scholarships, to families who need shelter, to the community that once stood by me when no one else did. The congregation murmured, some in shock, others nodding with respect. My children, seated near the back, flushed with humiliation. Their whispered greed had become public shame. I looked at them once, just once, and said, "Blood is not enough. Respect is the true inheritance." That night, when I returned home, I stood by the gate again. The metal was cool beneath my hand, the lock secure. I whispered, "It's done." The stars above Oregon shone brighter than they had in years. For the first time in decades, I felt peace. Not because I had destroyed them, but because I had reclaimed myself. Revenge is not about cruelty. It's about balance, about teaching those who take without giving that there is always a price. And my children? They had paid theirs. Justice has no echo unless it is witnessed. Private revenge is satisfying, but public revenge? That is unforgettable. It becomes truth written in stone, a story no one can deny. And I wanted my children's betrayal carved into memory, not just mine, but the entire community's. The dinner had shaken them, but it wasn't enough. They still thought they could persuade me, wear me down, twist the story until neighbors pitied them instead of me. I could hear it in their voices when they shouted at my gate. "She's confused. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's too old to make decisions like this." No, I wouldn't let them rewrite my story. So I planned the confrontation carefully. The stage would not be my kitchen or my gate. It would be the community hall in town during the quarterly church gathering, the one event where every neighbor, friend, and family member attended. I requested a moment on the agenda. "Just a few minutes," I said. The pastor agreed, thinking I wanted to give thanks. And in a way, I did. The day arrived. The hall smelled faintly of wood polish and baked bread. Rows of chairs filled the room, the murmur of voices rising like a tide. I sat near the front, my folder on my lap, my hands steady. My children arrived late, sweeping in with forced smiles. their clothes too fine for a small-town event. I could feel their eyes on me, suspicious, wary. They knew something was coming, but not what. The gathering began with hymns, prayers, announcements. My heart beat in rhythm with the organ, not from fear, but from anticipation. Finally, the pastor called my name. I rose slowly, every eye in the room following me. The wooden floor creaked beneath my steps as I walked to the podium. I placed the folder down, opened it, and looked out at the crowd. Friends who had watched me struggle, neighbors who had seen me work myself to the bone, some with pity, some with admiration, and in the back, my children, restless, shifting in their seats. I began softly. Many of you know my story. I came to this town as a young wife. I raised my children here. I worked in your homes, your businesses, your fields. I sacrificed so my children could eat, study, and live better lives. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded, eyes softened. I continued. But sometimes sacrifice is forgotten. Sometimes family chooses greed over gratitude, and when that happens, silence is no longer strength. It becomes permission. The room stilled. I heard a chair squeak in the back where my son sat. I lifted the first document. This is my property deed, signed in my name alone. For years, my children whispered about inheriting it, about selling it, about tearing it down. But it is not theirs. It never was. It never will be. Gasps rose from the audience. My daughter's face flushed red. She tried to speak, but I raised my hand. No interruptions. You've had years to speak. Tonight, it's my turn. I held up the second set of papers. This is my will. Updated, signed, sealed. My home, my land, my money will not pass to those who disrespected me. It will pass to this community, to scholarships for children who work hard, to families who know the meaning of sacrifice, to the church that never turned me away. The whispers grew louder. People leaned toward one another, exchanging looks. Some smiled with pride. Others shook their heads in disbelief. And then I delivered the final blow. And this. I pulled out a page, handwritten notes of conversations I had overheard. These are the words my own children spoke, that I was too old, too weak, that my life was just a waiting game until they could claim what I had built. The silence that followed was deafening. My son shot to his feet, his face crimson. That's not true. She's twisting everything. But the crowd had already seen the evidence. They had heard the words. I didn't shout back. I didn't argue. I simply said, calm and steady, respect cannot be twisted. Either it is given or it is not. The pastor's voice broke the silence. Children, sit down. You dishonor yourselves by denying what everyone can see. My daughter sank into her chair, tears spilling down her cheeks. My son stood frozen, fists clenched, but powerless. And I felt lighter than I had in years. The moment became a spectacle. Neighbors whispered, nodding toward me with admiration, toward my children with disgust. One elderly woman reached for my hand as I walked back to my seat. You are braver than all of them combined, she whispered. When I sat down, I didn't look at my children again. I didn't need to. Their humiliation was complete. Not because I destroyed them, but because I revealed them. That night, after the gathering ended, I walked out into the cool Oregon air. The stars shimmered above, the smell of pine sharp and clean. At the edge of the parking lot, my son caught up to me. His voice shook with fury. How could you do this to us? In front of everyone? I turned slowly, met his eyes, and said the words that had lived in my chest for months. Because family is not who shares your blood. Family is who shares your respect. I left him standing there in the dark. When I drove home, I stopped at the gate. I stepped out, closed it behind me, and locked it. The sound rang out in the night like a final bell. I whispered to the silence, "It's finished." The betrayal had been public, the humiliation undeniable. Justice had been served, not in anger, but in truth. And yet, even as peace settled over me, one thought lingered. They believed the confrontation was the end. But for me, it was only the beginning of a life lived on my own terms, and they would never again cross the gate to take it from me. Peace is not given, it is earned, and after a lifetime of sacrifice, after betrayal and humiliation, I had finally earned mine. The night after the confrontation, I slept without dreams. No tossing, no turning, just deep, heavy rest, the kind I hadn't felt in decades. When I woke, the Oregon sun was already streaming through the curtains. The house felt different, lighter, as if the walls themselves exhaled, relieved of a weight they had carried with me. For years, I had lived in silence, carrying the burden of thankless sacrifice. For years, I had hoped that love would be enough to hold my family together. But love without respect is hollow. And now, I no longer had to pretend otherwise. The days that followed were quiet. My phone, once buzzing with shallow requests and false concern, stayed silent. My children did not visit. My gate remained untouched. And for the first time in my life, their absence did not feel like loss. It felt like freedom. I spent mornings on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the wind whisper through the pines. The air smelled clean, sharp with cedar and damp soil. I noticed things I had long overlooked, the way sunlight turned the fields golden at dusk, the sound of owls at night, the steady rhythm of the creek that ran behind the house. It was as though the land, once drowned in noise and demands, was finally speaking to me again. I began to care for myself in ways I had once forgotten. I mended the old rocking chair on the porch, sanding it smooth, repainting it until it gleamed. Each stroke of the brush felt like mending more than wood. It felt like mending my own spirit. I started cooking meals not out of duty, but out of joy. Dishes for myself, seasoned the way I liked them. Stews rich with flavor, bread warm from the oven. The kitchen, once a place of endless labor for others, became a sanctuary for me. Even the house seemed to change. The broken clock I had fixed ticked steadily, filling the rooms with rhythm. The garden bloomed brighter, as though the flowers sensed my peace. But it wasn't only solitude that brought healing. It was community. Neighbors who had witnessed the truth at the gathering began to stop by, not to take, but to give. One woman brought me a pie and said, "You reminded us what dignity looks like." A man from down the road offered to repair my fence, not for money, but for respect. Children from the church left drawings on my porch, thanking me for the scholarships that would carry them forward. For the first time, my sacrifices were seen, acknowledged, honored, not by my own blood, but by those who understood the meaning of family beyond titles. And I realized something profound. Sometimes the family you create by love and respect is stronger than the one you are given by blood. I also found new rhythms. On Sundays, I attended church not out of obligation, but out of choice. I sat among friends, no longer the woman in the shadows, but the woman who had spoken truth when it mattered most. The whispers that once dismissed me now carried my name with admiration. On weekdays, I tended to my land. I planted vegetables in neat rows, tilled soil with patient hands, trimmed the hedges by the gate until they stood proud and firm. The earth responded, generous and alive. And in the evenings I wrote. Pages of thoughts, memories, lessons. I wrote not for my children, who had closed their hearts, but for myself, and for anyone who might someday need to know that sacrifice without respect must never be tolerated. Yet even in peace, there were moments of ache. Sometimes late at night, I thought of my children as they once were, tiny hands gripping mine, voices full of laughter, eyes bright with innocence. I remembered promises whispered in the dark. "Mama, I'll take care of you when you're old." Those memories were bittersweet, but I did not let them harden me. Instead, I let them serve as reminders that love is precious, but only when it is real. One afternoon, months later, I found myself standing by the gate again, the same gate I had once locked in anger. This time, I leaned against it in peace. The wood was sturdy beneath my hand, the metal lock shining in the sun. But it no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a boundary, a choice. The gate had become more than just an entrance. It was a symbol, a line between what I would accept and what I would never accept again. A reminder that dignity is not negotiable. Seasons turned. Autumn painted the trees in shades of fire. Winter covered the fields in white silence. Spring brought blossoms to the orchard, their scent sweet and fresh. Life continued, steady, unbroken. And so did I. I no longer looked down the road waiting for cars that never came. I no longer set extra plates at the table, hoping for visits. I no longer begged for a place in lives that had no room for me. Instead, I filled my table with neighbors, friends, and children who saw me as more than a wallet, more than a stepping stone. Laughter filled my home again, not forced, not borrowed, but genuine. One evening, as I watched the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold, I whispered to myself, "You did it. You survived. And more than that, you won." Because revenge had not left me bitter. It had left me free. And freedom, after a lifetime of chains, is the sweetest peace of all. The final lesson I carried was simple but unshakable. Real family respects you, not just your money. That truth became my anchor, my compass, my peace, and no one, not even my own blood, could take it from me again. Her true story is mine, but it could belong to anyone who has ever given everything only to be treated as nothing. I learned that real family is not defined by blood. Real family respects you, not just your money, not just what you can provide. Respect is the true inheritance. When they told me to stay in the car, I closed the gate behind me and opened a new life. I chose dignity over humiliation, peace over pleading, truth over silence, and in the end, I proved one thing. Love without respect is just a chain, and chains are meant to be broken. Now I want to ask you, if your own children or grandchildren dismissed you, used you, humiliated you, would you forgive them? Or would you lock the gate behind you and make them feel the weight of what they took for granted? Tell me in the comments. Share your own story. Because too many of us carry silent sacrifices that no one sees. Let this channel be the place where those truths are spoken. Subscribe, share this video, and never forget, dignity is worth more than gold.